Evil Mir mocked me at the anniversary party for being a mere figurehead, and said many cruel things about my miscarriage. Her husband shocked everyone and now she is paying the price. My husband Mark and I have been together for almost 8 years and we have a very happy marriage, but there have always been some conflicts when it comes to my husband's parents. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law harbored negative feelings towards me from the start. When we got engaged, Phil was very considerate, but he always let Mir boss him around and mostly kept to himself. My husband comes from a wealthier background than I do, and my mother-in-law has hated me for that reason from the start. She thinks it's wrong that I come from a middle-class family, and she criticizes the way I look, the clothes I wear or the shoes I have. I admit that I didn't realize this before, but I always dress appropriately, no matter who I'm meeting, but it's never good enough. Because of her constant comments, I started buying expensive clothes that I would only wear when I had to see her, so that she wouldn't pity me. Once I wore a white shirt that she had seen me wear a month earlier, and Mir immediately commented that I was repeating outfits, which rich people don't do. She laughed about how embarrassing this was. My husband did try to stop her, but Mir deliberately said these things in front of everyone, making me blush with embarrassment. She even forced me to go shopping with her and buy clothes that I didn't like at all. However, I gratefully accepted her kindness and thanked her sincerely. I always tried to have a positive relationship with them because I truly believed that she would eventually warm up to me, but then things started to escalate and the strings attached to their generosity began to show, and we had been dating for less than a year. I got a job with a really good company, which allowed me to significantly improve my standard of living. Mark was very happy about this, but my mother-in-law was not. She started calling and texting me, demanding that I tell her exactly how much I was earning, because according to her, women and their family incomes should always be lower than men's. I was really angry and told her that I was destined to earn more than my husband because I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, which is highly profitable. Mill then started telling me that if I wanted the job I could have it, but when I married Mark I would have to leave so that the other family members would stop talking about Mark's inability to provide. This really made me laugh because it's not the 1950s anymore, and Mark has never had a problem with my job or my income. I decided to talk to Mark about this directly, and let him know that his mother was making me feel uncomfortable. He got angry because she had been contacting me and texting me about this. I don't know what he talked to Mir about, but she called me crying, saying that I was trying to create a rift between her and her son and that I was the personification of evil. She said that she would never allow Mark to marry a woman, and that I had to leave him. I hung up the phone and blocked her number because I was beginning to get tired of her malicious behavior, which was certainly the first major sign. Of course, Mark and I never broke up, but it did make me wonder what kind of mother he had grown up with for all those years. I couldn't completely cut ties with Miriam because Mark was invited to some family gatherings where I also had to go, and Miriam would be there completely ignoring me as if I didn't exist. For example, if we walked into Mark's cousin's birthday party, everyone would greet us, and Miriam would rush over to hug Mark and ask him how his day was. If Mark tried to bring me into the conversation, she would pretend to look around with interest and then quickly change the subject. One pattern I started noticing was that she would always bring up her health issues, telling Mark how she was getting old and weak and how she could suddenly die, so he needed to take care of her more, even though she had absolutely no health issues and was perfectly healthy. It was strange how she tried to manipulate her son to gain his emotional attraction and attention. When Mark proposed to me after years of dating, he invited everyone to our engagement party. My parents and grandparents were very happy for us, but I cannot say the same for my husband's parents. Mill came to our party with a scout's face, and when she saw the ring on my hand, her face became even uglier. She started telling Mark how disrespectful it was that he bought me a bigger ring than the one she got from Phil. Phil tried to stop her and tell her to behave, but Mill kept saying how her son could never do anything nice for her, but did everything for this poor girl. It made me so angry, so I told her if she couldn't respect that then she had to leave. Mill was shocked to hear this, but I knew I couldn't let her ruin the happiest day of my life, and in front of the whole family at that. Phil showed her out while she kept shouting Mark's name, who was holding my trunk. Mill called to apologize to Mark, saying she was drunk, even though we all knew she hardly ever drank wine. Since Mill apologized to both of us, we decided to let bygones be bygones. Wedding planning Mill insisted on attending my dress fitting, saying she had always wanted to, but it must be noted that by this point I had very little patience left for her. but she was my fiancé's mother and I couldn't be rude to her openly, so I allowed her to attend. I did warn my mother and cousin, so they were prepared in case she tried to pull her usual tricks as expected. Mill had a problem with my clothes, telling me that educated people don't wear so much lace and asking me to wear a more traditional white dress. I refused, and my mother told her that I was not her daughter, so she should mind her own business. Mill got angry and started slumping her shoulders, sulking in the corner like a little child. She was constantly critical of my outfit choices while I tried on clothes. Finally, I decided to wear the dress we paid, and then Mir walked up to me and told me she was glad I chose that dress because it made my arms look fat. Hearing this comment, my incredibly patient mother started yelling at her and warning her about her immature behavior. I almost burst into tears because no one wants to hear comments like that about their dream dress, and I'm not even fat, so I don't understand why she said that. We let her know that she would have to find her own way home, because I had picked up everyone else that day, and I refused to let her go back with us because I knew she would continue to badmouth me in the car. Mill started freaking out and asked me how I could just leave her, but I did while I was dropping my mom off at home. I got a call from Mark, who started to question me about how I could do this to my mother, and how she had called him crying about how I had deliberately left her. I told Mark that I would explain everything when I got home, but he continued to berate me, so my mother, who could hear everything because he had the speakerphone on, let him know that he had no idea what his mother had done to us. She went on to list Mill's behavior and ended by asking Mark if he thought that was the behavior of a respectable adult. Mark was obviously embarrassed because he didn't know the whole story, and in any case Mill didn't tell him the whole story. Later, when he got home, he apologized again to me, and he told me how scared he was, thinking that his elderly mother was alone, and that's why he reacted the way he did. I told him that I would never have done something like that if she hadn't been treating me badly all day. Mark hugged me and told me I knew he would understand if I wanted to cancel her wedding invitation, which was the last thing I wanted to do at that moment, but I was afraid Phil might not be able to come because if his wife wasn't there, Phil wouldn't be allowed to attend either. I couldn't let my husband's wedding go by without his parents being there. It would be cruel. We decided to talk to Phil before the wedding, and let him know that he had to remember to move Mill away if her behavior started to get out of control. He understood and assured us that he was fully aware of what we were going through. I felt sorry for the poor guy, who had to look after her around the clock during the wedding. Mir behaved surprisingly well and kept bragging to everyone about how grand our celebration was, as if she had paid for everything. Thought that, since he came from a wealthy family and Mill always flaunted it, maybe she and Phil had paid for our wedding. However, during the wedding toast, Phil made it clear that they had not paid a penny and that it was all the result of our hard work. He also talked about how proud he was to have an accomplished daughter, and that he never imagined that his son would end up with someone as smart as me. Later guests also congratulated us on having done this on our own. Mir's face turned red. She was obviously angry with Phil, and during the father-daughter dance, my father and I danced for a while, and everyone applauded. Mark was about to come over and take over when Mir ran up and said she had to be the first woman to dance with her precious son before any other woman. Mark agreed, and they danced later at the wedding. Mir came over to congratulate me, and I smiled politely when she told me I was wrong. I feel like your arms aren't that thick in this dress. Then she walked away nonchalantly, which really made me angry, but I didn't want her mean comments to ruin my beautiful day. Everyone had a great time, and we danced all night, probably drinking too much the next day. When I woke up, I received a few messages from Mill. When I read the messages, I was absolutely stunned. She wrote that she had been embarrassed all night, and that I would have to behave better if I wanted to be part of her family. I was a bit hungover, but I remember the whole night perfectly well. Just in case, I called my parents and asked them if I had said or done anything embarrassing. They said I hadn't and that everyone had had a great time. Later, my husband woke up and I showed him all the messages. He told me to ignore them. I was a little suspicious, so I asked him to tell me what Mill meant. At that point, Mark revealed that Mill had been coming over all night to tell him that I was having too much fun, and that if I even danced with my cousin, she would tell Mark that I was like a wild horse and that he needed to control me because we were married. Mark joked about this and told me how he ignored her comments at the time, and how I should ignore her comments as well. However, I felt offended that she would even suggest that I had no right to talk about me like that when I was dancing with my own family to celebrate our wedding. I wanted to confront her on the spot, But Mark and I were about to go on our honeymoon, so I put the matter aside for the time being. The honeymoon was fantastic and we had a really good time. The day we returned from our honeymoon, Mir called me and started sweetly asking me how my honeymoon was. It was strange because she hardly ever called me. I told her that I didn't like what she had said to Mark on the wedding night, and she quickly disclaimed any intention of offending, and then went on to brag about the details of the honeymoon, asking all the time if we had a lot of time alone. I asked her to be honest with me because I didn't think our honeymoon was any of her business, but Mir started talking about how she just wanted to know if she was going to be a grandmother soon. When I heard that, I almost choked for 2 reasons. First, I had just gotten married, and she was hoping that I would be the instrument of her dream come true in less than a week. Second, neither Mark nor I wanted children. We had discussed this issue long before we started dating seriously, and our views had never changed. We didn't want to raise children even though we weren't opposed to them. Now, this was something we had never actually told our parents directly because after all it was our private business. I kept my mouth shut, because Mill kept saying that I needed to get pregnant soon because my biological clock was ticking and this was my best childbearing age. Hearing her say this made me feel very uncomfortable. When she went further, she started saying that my husband and I should stop using condoms, which was highly inappropriate. I stopped her immediately and told her that I didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. When I told Mark about this, he was very angry and immediately called her to express his thoughts and tell her honestly that we didn't want to have children. Miriam reacted as we expected, screaming and raging on the phone as if we had killed her dog or something. She started threatening that if he didn't give her a grandchild she wouldn't, and Mark laughed and told her that she and Phil had signed a prenuptial agreement so she didn't have any assets anyway, so she couldn't give him anything anyway. Miriam yelled at me, saying that it was all my fault, that as a woman my only job was to give my husband children, but I couldn't even do that. It was really upsetting when she started saying things like mistake. Mark told her to stop, but she continued insulting me, telling us how we had destroyed her lifelong dream and why we got married if we didn't want children. Hearing this, Mark finally snapped. He told her that he had had enough and that she had to shut up. He let her know that she could no longer speak to me like that and that, since she had been disrespecting me for years, he was through with her. Phil tried to make amends, but he told her that he intended to cut her off from our place or our lives. He warned her that if she showed up, we would call the police directly and embarrass her in front of our neighbors, something we knew she cared a great deal about. We have kept our word ever since and have cut off all contact with her. Phil did try to intervene once, but after talking to Mark and getting the full story, he supported our decision. Over the years, my parents and Phil have met a few times, and we have never invited Miller. Thankfully, she respected our rules and boundaries. Last December, we became pregnant by accident, and we were shocked because we didn't want it, but our lives were in a good situation, so we wanted to let nature take its course. Everyone knew the news and called to congratulate us. Miller sent us a bouquet of flowers and an apology letter, which said that she had undergone therapy for years and her behavior had changed. I didn't reply to her because I was still unsure about her so-called change. However, when I was only 2 months pregnant, I had a miscarriage. It happened in the middle of the night and I was shocked when I saw the blood all over the floor. I woke up and Mark was crying. He immediately drove me to the nearest hospital. We were told that we had lost the baby. It was heartbreaking because even though we didn't want to be pregnant, we still loved the little one, and were willing to do whatever it took to raise him. I didn't know how to deal with my grief because the situation was so awful. Mark and my parents were always there for me. Phil and Mark's families called to check on us and came to visit. My mom stayed at our house for a few days because she knew I didn't want to get out of bed. I felt so much pain deep inside and would cry for hours on end. Mark was my rock and I slowly started to feel better. Last week, Phil invited us to his and Mill's 25th wedding anniversary. It meant a lot to our family, and everyone received an invitation. Mark and I didn't want to go because we knew the subject of the miscarriage would come up again and it really affected us. We didn't want to have to explain to everyone again about the worst day of our lives, but Phil begged us to come because he wanted to spend time with us and told us we needed to give ourselves a night off to relax. We reluctantly agreed. It was the first time we had seen Mir in years, but I had been having such a hard time on my own that I didn't even have the energy to think about her or her antics. Mir was happy to see Mark and ran hugging him, but she was cold towards me in comparison, But I didn't care, so I found a place to sit and let Mark talk to his mother later at dinner. Everyone talked about their good news and the beauty of life as usual, and one of Mark's cousins mentioned that she was pregnant, which made me feel very sad. When Mir suddenly stood up and raised the microphone to propose a toast, everyone congratulated her. Raising her glass, she began to say that she was happy to be surrounded by her loved ones, and that she would not choose any other way. Mir then congratulated Mark's cousin on her pregnancy, and began to say that she would bring a little joy into the world. As others kill their children, she gave me a straight look and began to say how she knew what I had done to my child, because it could not have been a simple miscarriage. Mark and I were immediately stunned, because we could not believe that she could be so cruel. Miller continued to shout that her son could not have fallen for someone like me, and that she had allowed us to get married. At least I could still give her grandchildren, but I was not even capable of that. She declared that I was nothing more than a trophy wife, that she couldn't wait for Mark to divorce me, that I wasn't part of her family anyway, so no one would need to attend her next anniversary party, and she cheered and drank as if she had just given a victory speech. There was a silence, and Mark asked his mother what she was doing. They started screaming, and she continued to accuse, while he tried to protect me as much as possible, saying how ridiculous my mother's behavior was. I felt so ashamed and embarrassed that I suddenly burst into tears. It was all too much for me, and I felt so emotional. Phil, who had been sitting in his seat watching the farce, stood up and asked everyone to calm down. He said he needed to say something important to let off some steam, and he grabbed the microphone to announce that he had been suffering for the past 25 years. But tonight he had finally seen the truth and he was fed up with it. He looked at Mill, who looked at him confused, as he announced that there would be no wedding anniversary next year because he didn't want to be married to her anymore. She looked as if a wall had fallen on her face. Phil then announced that he had stayed married to a woman like her all these years, because he had wanted to set a good example for my husband, and not let the family fall apart. However, after seeing what Mir had been up to all these years and how she continued to hurt the people he invited, he realized that he was too old to put up with it. While Phil invited the guests to help themselves to the food, Mir looked dazed, but he said he was going out for a drink. He took off his suit and tie and walked out of the wedding. Mir started shouting at him to come back, but he ignored her. She took her anger out on me, saying that I had ruined everything anyway. But Mark told her it was all her fault. He was glad his father had finally left her, which must have broken Mir's heart because she became very quiet and told everyone she was leaving too. Some of the guests came to me too because they were worried about me. Mark's cousin, who is pregnant, came over to hug me. Phil stayed with us and refused to go back despite Mir's constant calls. He told us he would go to the divorce lawyer. I feel so guilty because I feel responsible for all of this. Was I at fault for Phil divorcing my husband's mother? Please give me honest opinions. Only update 1. I didn't realize this post would cause such a stir. It's incredible how many people have shared their own experiences with toxic mills. I can't imagine why my parents are like this. Also, please don't attack my husband. He stands up for himself every time. It's not easy having an overbearing, controlling toxic parent. I was lucky to have parents who loved me, but he obviously didn't. He grew up thinking her behavior was normal, and did everything he could to protect me. Finally, I want to thank everyone who has shared their experience of miscarriage. I am truly sorry for anyone who has been through this. I hate to admit it, but I feel so guilty because it was my job to protect the baby and I did everything I could, but I feel like I failed. Although it was definitely not my fault, I still feel like I failed. You guys are right, I need to go talk to a therapist. I also go to various forums where other mothers who have experienced this kind of tragedy meet so that I can feel understood. Phil has already submitted the divorce papers to Mir. It's been 2 months since my last update, and Phil has been living with us. He's been a very good guest. I can see where my husband gets his sense of humor from. Phil also likes to cook, and sometimes when I come home from work he has already cooked dinner. Em is really lucky to have him. And I don't know why she let herself lose such a treasure as Phil when she and Mark went to deliver the divorce papers. She refused to read the papers. Mark told me she yelled at them, saying they had no right to cut her off. She said all those things about me because she just wanted our family to be happy. Mark ignored her and helped Phil pack. Mill got angry and started throwing things on the floor and yelling at Phil. Phil threatened to call the police as it was technically his house. Hearing this, she shut up because she knew she had nowhere to go when the party was over. No one came to her aid except to say she was a big liar. Everyone knew she lied about me being a trophy wife because I earn a lot, and they understood the pain I went through with the miscarriage. Apparently, they all blamed it on Mir, and let her know that they didn't want to be with someone as unstable as her, who had no family and no friends because of her actions. She tried to plead with Phil, but he obviously didn't want anything to do with her. My parents spoke to Mir after they found out what she had done to me, and they didn't hesitate to take legal action against her for harassing me and publicly defaming me. My mother is not a silent person, and she told her exactly what she thought, knowing that my parents and I knew they would stand their ground and take her to court, so I wanted her to stay away from me. Update 3. Thanks to everyone who has supported me on this journey. It's been 8 months since my last update. I want to let you know that Phil is now free. He and Mir had a falling out, so she can't take anything that doesn't belong to her. He agreed to give her their joint account and let her keep the car. She was so angry that she kept demanding that he let her keep the house too. But he and his lawyer laughed at her because the house belonged to Phil before they got married. Mark heard that she is currently staying with her cousin, while she looks for somewhere affordable to live. I think she has enough money to live comfortably on her own. Mir is not with us most of the time, although every now and then we hear her trying to tell people her story to get sympathy. Well, she can do what she wants because Peruse we are happy. Mark and I are doing well. The therapy I mentioned earlier really helped me meet new people who completely understand me. Mark has also signed himself up for individual therapy sessions to deal with past issues. Our careers are going well and we are grateful for everything we have now.